in January of 2015, actually had like a middle of the night dream. All I remember from this dream is these 3 native little girls covered in lip gloss, rosy cheeks, brown skin, and they were giggling and laughing. When I woke up, I wrote down to create a product, and then I wanted to use a portion of the profits to do something to support my Indigenous community.
Jenn Harper, the owner of Cheekbone Beauty, a fabulous, incredible line of beauty supplies.
I don't have a fancy business school education. I have no idea about ingredients or formulation. If I knew what I know now, I probably would have not gone down the path.
Why didn't you quit? Why? How? Where does that come from in you?
Our whole goal is to, one, provide representation for my Indigenous community. We have worked so hard to try to define this space, Indigenous beauty. That word Indigenous beauty, when people hear it, it's going to be synonymous with sustainability.
Welcome back to another episode of Who Judges the Judge, the podcast intended to make you question the way you judge the world around you. Today's guest, I'm so excited for, Jenn Harper, the owner of Cheekbone Beauty, a fabulous, incredible line of beauty supplies you can find in Sephora, as well as locations around the world. Super successful with a really amazing backstory. Jenn, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Welcome. So Cheekbone Beauty, tell us about it.
Yeah, so started from an actual pop out of bed, middle of the night dream. I was selling seafood, so I worked for a seafood company for many years. And in January of 2015, actually had like a middle of the night dream. And all I remember from this dream is these 3 native little girls covered in lip gloss, rosy cheeks, brown skin, and they were giggling and laughing. But when I woke up, I wrote down to create a product. And at the time it was this lip gloss, because that was kind of what I remember from the dream. And then I wanted to use a portion of the profits to do something to support my Indigenous community. But a really important part of my journey is the backstory. So this was a time in my life when I was literally just learning about residential school and how that both of my grandparents survived that. Yeah. But I had no knowledge of that prior. Like I was 38 years old at the time. And I've really just thought, oh, wow, my family is super dysfunctional. Like what's wrong with me? All of those thoughts for many years. And then when you hear that about residential school system and how I learned this term along the way called generational or transgenerational trauma, and then discovered how that was ultimately passed on to me and my siblings. But Cheekbone, then sort of that's the early inception. I'm still doing my like Monday to Friday job selling seafood for about 3 years. But in the process, it was like everything anyone does who's new to entrepreneurship. So like market research, product development, trying to figure out how to make this lip gloss. You possibly, yes, could find it on YouTube and make it in your kitchen. But I'm married to someone who is in a heavily regulated industry. And so I knew that that would like not be possible because of like, you know, think of your kitchen, you make food there and you're not going to make a product you're probably going to sell to somebody at like a market or something. And so then immediately found online, there was a really easy way to put a product into the world. But it's so interesting because I was so naive to the beauty space at the time. And if I truly was to say and be really honest, if I knew what I know now, I probably would have not gone down the path. But being naive, I think, has us get to where we are today. But it's been so challenging. But our whole mission now is like our mission and vision is super, super clear. And that's that we make color cosmetics. So everything for lips, eyes, and face. And our whole goal is to, one, provide representation for my Indigenous community because I didn't see that growing up. And second, we do this and we use our Indigenous roots to actually make and create the products. So right now in the beauty world, there's all these conversations about clean beauty and how important that is. What we have actually done is just recognize that clean beauty, yes, great, check. This product is safe for humans. But what is happening is a lot of the ingredients aren't actually safe for the environment or ecosystems or aquatic life. And so those would be the raw materials that go into your like skincare, lipstick, hair care, all of those things. Once they go back into, and for instance, when you wash your makeup off, you're going in a lake ocean, you wash anything going down the drain, it's heading back into an ecosystem. And there are some ingredients that will never break down once it gets back to those environments. And then there are some that are known to be harmful to these ecosystems, in particular aquatic life. And so we looked at this and we're like, what would you, because now we're in this massively competitive space and industry, and we really thought that this would be our white space. Like, what is going to set our brand uniquely apart from everything that exists in the shelves? Because if you were to walk into Sephora, everything looks the same. How do you? So our position is like, we are what we say is beyond clean, and that Indigenous people have been the OGs of sustainability. And if you look around the world, it's Indigenous people that are protecting a lot of environmental issues that are happening. And so looking at my family's history and my ancestral roots and how Anishinaabe people look and feel about the environment or all living things has really played a big role into the kind of brand that we've built.
Okay, so did you like makeup before you had this dream?
Yes.
Like, were you someone who was into, beauty regimens and makeup as a thing?
Yes, 100%. So always, like, what I love to say is like a total like product junkie.
Okay.
In a bad way, because we try too many things, all the things, try all of them.
Got it. Okay. Did you dream about making your own or think like, oh, I could make this better?
Never.
Until you had this dream in 2015.
Exactly.
Okay. And so you go to sleep in 2015, like liking makeup, but comfortably in your job doing like seafood sales.
Well, it's interesting. So newly sober. So that dream comes 2 months after I got sober for real, because I started trying to get sober in 2010.
Okay.
Well, that's when I went, 2009, I went to rehab for the first time, again in 2010.
Yeah.
And then pretty much relapsed all the way into 2014.
Okay.
And in November 26, 2014 is when I get sober and have stayed sober for over 10 years now. Wow. And then that dream comes 2 months after getting sober. Wow. So I'm not, my job was always in sales. And in that, when you're in a sales career, it's a lot of, let's meet for a drink. And I kind of knew. And when I look back now at the world we live in versus I was in an industry where it's extremely male dominated. Okay. And I cannot believe with the amount of isms that I probably tolerated for way too long. So being sober, that I just having that dream, I was like, I don't think I could do that career for much longer. I knew that would have to end. Right. And so it's so fascinating to me that this dream happens and that this idea of building a beauty brand is like the next thing that I'm going to do. But yeah, not for sure like thinking before that ever that would be something possible for me.
Wow. And so you have this dream, you wake up and you're like pen to paper, sort of sketching out what you're going to be building, which you've created into something really phenomenal, both like for yourself, for your family, and for your community. That's incredible.
Thank you.
So sober for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
When did you start using?
Oh, so this is a funny story because I often thought this question is like, are we born addicts or do we become addicts? And I was like, I don't have the answer.
What do you think? What are you inclined to think?
I think we become addicts.
Okay.
I believe that now because I believe trauma are there's so many things in our lives that play a role into addiction.
So you don't believe in the disease model?
I do, but I think it's a developed disease. Like it develops over time. But at 10, my friend's dad used to make home brew. And this was just a kid from school. We're in grade 4. And we were playing in her room and she's like, let's try one of my dad's beers. And I remember being a very shy kid. And then we each drank one of her dad's beers. And I physically remember feeling funnier, like I could express myself and thinking in my head, oh my God, I love the way this made me feel. And I think that feeling hadn't left since I got sober, right? Like that's what I needed to feel good. And it wasn't like I was drunk through elementary school.
Right. But it was like,
that was the start. Yeah. And if I pinpoint it back, and then through high school, just drank, always was the girl that drank way too much and like blackout drunk whenever I would drink. There was never a healthy version for alcohol for me. I would pretend there was through my adult life, but it really wasn't, because even if I was at a party and maybe was able to have a couple glasses or a couple drinks, there would always be more coming later after that.
Okay. So you could hold it together for some time,
Yeah.
but once you start, it was like an on
and then
off
usually
switch.
like you're alone at that point, so then
Right.
you're just numbing.
I get it. That was me with cocaine. I
Yeah.
could never do just like a little bit. I could never do a couple of bumps. It was
Yeah.
like 3 days later, 5 days later
Yeah.
sometimes. So no, I get that. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in St. Catharines, Ontario. So
Okay.
born in Thunder Bay, but my mom and dad met. So my mom was at Lakehead University. He was working at a fishing lodge. They were quite young. My mom was 20 when I was born. And then they moved together to Toronto. They lived here till I was about 4, almost 4. They separate. And my dad stays in Toronto and my mom gets a job on the lake boats from the Niagara region that go through the canal. So that, plays a big role in my life of like massive, not only like the abandonment issues from separating my dad, but also like my mom just leaving me with people to take care of me while she had to work. And so when years of therapy, you discover you're like, oh, why would this happen to me? Why would I become an addict? And so for me, looking back, it had a lot to do with abandonment issues. So grow up there. But my mom, like she was a single mom for most of her life, then would meet and have my stepdad in our lives, but never consistent. Like, again, he worked on the lake boats. So then she's home now, but he's gone all the time or in and out of our lives. And then have 2 brothers from that side of my family with my mom. And then my dad marries or meets someone else. And I have 3 brothers from that side. And then I had a sister in between. I think I was around 5 when a sister was born, my sister Jessica, but I didn't meet her until my brother BJ's funeral.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like this crazy wild family. But I remember meeting a friend and she was saying, oh yeah, that's just like totally like native res life family. Like you meet a sibling at something like later on in life, like that's common. Obviously stereotype, maybe not every native family want to pose that out there, but most certainly common in our cultures and our communities.
And certainly not limited to your community.
No, I know that very well.
I was in university. I think I was 23 when I learned 22, 23 when I learned that I had a 5-year-old and 7-year-old sibling.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay.
That my dad had with his 3rd wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I get it. And it was through a friend of mine. My dad was in an industry that a friend of mine was buying. He was a supplier of tanning beds, and my friend was setting up a tanning salon and was doing business with my dad and was like, randomly, do you know Jordana? And it was like, oh yeah, I think I remember that daughter I had many, many years ago.
Oh wow.
And my dad gave my friend 2 photos, one of each of my
These
siblings.
are your siblings.
And was like, here.
By the way, tell her she has siblings.
Yeah.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
my buddy calls me and is like, hey, are you free Friday night? Come by for a drink. I show up. And he puts these photos on the table in front of me. And I was like, what are you showing me? These are 2 children. I don't know what you want for me. And he's like, yeah, that's your brother and sister.
Oh my God.
And I grew up as an only child. So this was like my only brother
You're
and
like,
sister. I was
what?
like, what is happening?
Yeah.
So I get it.
Okay, cool.
It's not limited to red light, but it's certainly far more common than it is in the Jewish community for sure, because that was like an anomaly back then. So you said that you didn't learn until later that your grandparents were in residential schools.
Yeah.
How does that come about? Like, is there a separation between you and your grandparents? Like, and how do you learn and how does that impact you?
Yeah. So my mom admits to like knowing that was the story, like that was my grandparents' experience. However, nobody talked about things like that situation mattered. Like everyone, I think, knew it was bad. And what I'm hearing is very common in our communities is that because of the things that happened there, nobody wanted to talk about it. So it was like something that was suppressed or has been suppressed. And we all know that like in the education system, it certainly wasn't something that was being taught to us whatsoever. I remember like in school, like all I ever learned about my culture was like, yeah, we lived in teepees and there was longhouses and wigwams and these were the different experiences of Indigenous people. And there was none of the real truths of what had happened. And so honestly, the 2015 is when the TRC was released. So that's that final report, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that's when so many people were talking about it. And then I started to read that and I'm like, oh my, like it was shocking to me. I had no idea about Indigenous history whatsoever and
Wow.
how so many of our families have had that experience. They say now, if you know an Indigenous person who's First Nations in Canada, they have either a parent, a grandparent, or a great grandparent that lived through the residential school system. And so finding out that it was my grandmother, so she's taken at 8 from our community and lives there till she was 18.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's
It's a
10
long
years
time
of,
of
like, without love,
Right.
right? Like, and so I've learned later,
I mean,
she's
at
since
best, some of the
Oh,
stories,
yeah.
some of the horror stories of what
Yeah.
people
And
endured.
people in our communities know that, like, there was kids that disappeared and weren't coming
Yes.
home and, like, they knew all this, and that's why there was so much fear. Because I think as a parent now, you think, if someone tried to come take my kid, I would lose my
Of
mind,
course.
and you would do everything in your power not to let that happen. But there was so much fear. Like, these were, like, agents that were coming. It was like, "You're going to go to jail, you'll be like, if you don't comply with this system and the way of doing things." And then now we know, so for 10 years, she lived like that, not even being able to, like, hug cousins, siblings that would be in the same place. I learned that if she tried to speak our language, Anishinaabemowin, she would be physically punished or beaten. I just now know, like, the kind of trauma that's going to ensue and how it is passed on. So she finally leaves, immediately starts to raise her own family. But how can we be a good mother, a loving mother, if we were never taught or even know what that looks like or feels like, right?
Right.
When we have that. So it's just that I just understanding that trauma is passed on. And as a parent, I recognize now, is like, this is such a hard job. And most people are just not even equipped for it. Like, it's so sad to think. And I think back of all the mistakes that I've made. And this is where, that mother's guilt will live with me forever about my own alcoholism and how that's impacted my children's lives. And knowing that there's nothing I can do to go back, but only share knowledge with people of, like, if you're planning on raising small children, like, these are such critical times. And it's like, these are humans that we have to craft and mold. And we have such a huge responsibility as parents. But unfortunately, through years of therapy as well, just recognizing my harboring so much resentment for my own parents for all those years, like carrying so much anger towards my mother and father, and how that plays a role in the addiction. But then at the same time, when I now know that they both were legitimately doing the best they could with what they knew, and that's all they could do. And that's all I could ever expect them to do. They did not know any better. And to see them both now older and have a deep understanding, and I really have so much gratitude for them recognizing, I guess, the error, being parents young. Like, I was both their first kids from both sides.
Right.
And just having both of them admit to their mistakes. And even my son most recently said to me, one of the things that he appreciates is how I say I'm sorry.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, when you were growing up, were you on res at all?
No. So
Okay.
my dad lived in Toronto. My
Right.
mom lived in St. Catharines. So I
Right.
would literally take the Greyhound,
Back and
like,
forth.
literally back and forth, and go stay with my dad, like, usually every other weekend. And when I was 14, he moved with my stepmom and my siblings all back to the res.
Okay.
And so they had left Toronto. And that really was a big moment for me, when I felt like they were all, like, gone. And now I had no family, so to speak, anymore on that side of my family. And it was really a tough time for me, because you're 14 and I'm not understanding, like, all the adult things of possibly why they're moving back there.
Right.
I was just
You
thinking
just feel like they've left
I'm
me.
thinking they all left me.
Right.
Yeah. And then stayed and lived in St. Catharines with my mom. So I didn't ever have any time but visiting on when they lived there.
And would you visit for long periods of time?
I would go in the summer, so it'd probably
Okay.
be like 2 weeks at a time that I would go and visit.
And within the community, do you find that, like, the residential school system is something you don't talk a lot about?
Nobody was talking about it back
That's so
then.
interesting to me.
Only
So I'm
now.
a descendant of Holocaust survivors.
Yeah.
And so I grew up with stories of the concentration camps. I grew up hearing these, like, horror stories of what my relatives endured
Wow.
during World War II. Like, it was ingrained in me from the
Mhm.
time I was really young. And one of my closest cousins also similarly was raised hearing the stories from the time she was young. And we recently went to like a Holocaust survival event in which one of my cousins interviewed my great uncle.
Oh,
And
wow.
during the course of her doing this interview to talk about his experience during World War II, she said, I'm learning all of this as I'm doing the interview. She did not grow up hearing any of it. She knew that he was a survivor, but had no idea of like the stories and the trauma that he had endured.
Mhm.
And I mean, my cousin looked at each other, we're like, how did she not know? We thought that everyone was raised on these stories. If you're a
Mhm.
descendant of Holocaust
Yeah.
survivors, you're raised on the stories. And it's interesting for me to hear that what those weren't the stories that you were raised on, because similarly, what your ancestors went through in the residential schools had a similar impact. It was different, but similar in a lot of
Yes.
ways, to what transpired. And so it's interesting for me to hear that it wasn't something that you were raised hearing about or understanding or appreciated as being, that trauma that's passed down through the generation.
Yeah, and it's always been interesting to me that people obviously like this knowledge and information, it was there, just no one was talking about it,
Right.
right? And that's what I find interesting about recovery and why I feel certain ways about Alcoholics Anonymous or any anonymous thing because I don't feel that served me well.
Me
It was
neither.
hiding it. I felt like
Yes.
it actually made the shame bigger.
Right.
And what has healed me was like speaking to it, like giving the shame has been removed from my addiction because the amount that I talk about it.
Right.
And so, can you imagine? Because I feel like the differences between the Jewish community and the Indigenous community is the speaking to it and
Mhm.
how so many things where you could travel around the world and there is so many honorable memorials and
Yes.
people having these conversations and it has happened that way whereas that's only just started for our people so I do am and certainly more hopeful for the next generations because when I look at my little nieces and nephews and my own children, I think they will have nothing to be ashamed of because they can see their people not just surviving anymore, but actually thriving and being a
Absolutely.
part of sort of this new narrative that we're all trying to work hard to create. Not despite many, many problems still exist. However, I feel like just us speaking to it now is going to change things dramatically.
What are your thoughts on these land acknowledgments? I
Oh my goodness, I don't know. I think they
I'm
feel
not
so
saying
silly
this.
now. They really do. I feel like they feel silly, but I get both sides. You'll always find me just landing in the middle because I'm very much of like I do see both sides. Like I see why it is important, but if it is in many cases, sometimes it does feel like it's just sort of routine, I guess.
So, as you know, I do a lot of events and speaking engagements and
Yeah.
galas, and they're consistent.
Mhm.
And so hearing someone acknowledge the land that we're on makes sense to me, but then there's always this thank you, and it drives me crazy to hear any corporation or, event organizer thanking the indigenous community for the lands that we're on as though it was given when it
Oh,
was
right.
stolen,
Yes, correct.
when it
Yeah.
was taken in the most horrific possible manner
Yeah.
that when there's that thank you at the end, I almost every time feel like you're doing a disservice
Yeah.
by erasing the way in which that land
Mm.
was transferred and taking away from the story. And
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that when we own up to the story and we own up to what is, transpired in our own lives and within our communities, then it does eradicate some of that shame or at least get us to the
Yes.
other side of it
Yeah.
and helps us process and put through it. And whenever I hear it, I just and so
Thank
I'm
you.
always curious because obviously, like, it's not my history,
Yeah.
but I couldn't imagine, my relatives in Poland being thanked for giving up their land, and it's like, wait a second, nobody gave up the land. It
No.
wasn't something you can thank for. In fact, you should be doing a much better job of making those reparations.
Yeah. It's funny. I was like, now I'm going to be like paying so much attention to that part. Are people saying thank you after
Yes.
that? Yeah.
Yeah. They're
I
acknowledging the
think I
land that we're
slip
on.
out mentally, to be honest, probably
Okay.
when they start the land acknowledgement, just because I feel like it just feels weird to me. And that's just my opinion. I'm probably going to get hate from all kinds of Indigenous folks in my community for
I
even
hope
saying
not.
that.
I
But
just think
it feels
it's
weird and like it's systematic, and does it even have any meaning? Like what, like you just said, what does it really mean? Because if someone's saying thank you, you're right. Like, thank you for taking this. Yeah.
right in the
Strange.
most brutal
Yeah.
fashion
And not
imaginable.
lovely. Yeah. I'm in the
No.
midst of reading this book called The Knowing by Tanya Talga right now, and it is about really like HBC, like Hudson Bay's relationship in the, you know, colonization journey and story, and it is really like raw and horrific.
Right.
Like human, like there was slavery involved and
Yes.
they were part of that. Like there was so many things that you're like, wow. But when I see the like stripes now, I think differently about them,
Oh,
right?
it's so interesting.
Yeah, as much as there's all these conversations about like and really sad, it is people have lost their jobs. It is painful to see this iconic Canadian business disappear. And then in the media, what was it? It's Canadian Tire, I think, bought all of their IP, which includes the
Yes.
stripes, and just hearing how many people are discussing it. And then I'm in the middle of reading this book at that same time, and I'm like, no one, people really don't know what really happened. But when you're reading the details, and she is an incredible researcher, she's not just a writer. Like there's so much research that goes into her pieces of work that I was shocked. I'm like, oh wow, am I sad it's gone? Right? I was like, oh, maybe if your origins are that horrific, your lasting
Right.
legacy should it mean something? But then that plays again that whole role. Like that's part of the history, right? But we as regular people, if you weren't reading and dove into the research of actually what happened, then you're not going to have those feelings, right?
But we should
Yeah.
acknowledge both sides of the history. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we eradicate it. I mean, it is what it is. I think that we're doing a little bit too much eradication of our history and changing names and not acknowledging why and not
Yes. Like
acknowledging the
understanding.
backstory.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, oh,
But the
we no
media,
longer call this Dundas Square anymore. Okay, but let's
the
delve
media
into really what's
is the
behind
worst
it.
though. I blame the media because they're like,
Absolutely.
their clickbait is so annoying, and just like how they throw these lines out, and you're like, that's not this, like, it's so frustrating. And we live in a world where I honestly feel the critical thinking is like diminishing, right? Like, and I fear, I'm a mom and I have a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old, and I literally feel and fear how they're going to learn and think about things, right?
Oh, me too.
Yeah. Like I'm
I hire
scared.
students.
Yeah.
And I'm blessed this summer with a fabulous student who's very intelligent and hardworking, but that has not been this
The
experience
case.
by and large over the last 5 years. I've
Wow.
really seen, and I've been, sort of mentoring and a principal to articling students now for, I want to say about 13 years. And the steady decline of that sort of work ethic and critical thinking
Yeah.
skills. And just,
It's
people who want to
different.
take matters into their own hands. Let me do the research. Let me figure this out and then come to you. And instead, it's like, can you give me step-by-step
Yeah.
instructions? Like, this is not paint by numbers.
No, it is. Yeah. I'm a Gen X and I just have a whole wildly, and I know my view is really way off from the views right now. So again, going back to that balance and having a team people that work at Cheekbone, and we're different generations, and I'm trying to be reasonable, right? Like I'm trying to understand, but I was like, back in my day, I feel like such an old woman when I'm saying those things, but it's like the things I did to like get to the places. And I know the success of this brand is not because I'm like worked 9 to 5. Let's be
Right.
real, right? Like the success of the brand is not because I'm taking the easy route on anything. Like I work my butt off. And I'm not ashamed of that. I actually probably brag about it too much to my family and my kids. I'm like, if you worked as hard as I did. But I really believe like sometimes I don't have a fancy business school education.
Right.
I had to like literally learn as I was building, which is a really hard way to learn sometimes. and expensive and you make a lot of mistakes. However, I think we don't always when you're an entrepreneur, you can hire the right people that have incredible skills to help you build it. But when you're not the one with those skills, that's where hard work really, really does matter. And you're going to be, overextending yourself. So I try to be really balanced, but it is hard when you come from a different generation and seeing how different it is now.
So you get this dream in 2015. You spend 3 years doing the research, figuring out how to make beauty products. You said you don't have a business degree. Do you have a chemistry degree? Did you know what
No.
you were doing to physically create different beauty products?
No, not at all. Not at all.
I mean, you knew what you liked and you knew what worked for you, but above and beyond that, I mean, how do you take your first steps towards creating these products?
Yes.
And then how do you get them into stores and how do you get people to buy them? How do you do that?
Really, again, a lot of learning and massive amount of hard work. So at first, and I'm always super clear about this, the starting Cheekbone, building the brand, because that was kind of my wheelhouse, I guess. I knew about marketing and I knew how to create a brand story and understand story is important because that was kind of part of the job I was doing in my work career, but completely different industry. And so I felt like, okay, we're doing that. And then with product, I had no money. And so I knew I'm not an influencer. I'm not a celebrity. There's no way anyone is ever going to invest in this unless I prove a concept first. And so turns out getting the product side of things is not as difficult. It's called private white label. There's manufacturers all over the world. We found one, fortunately, in Toronto at the time, and they will make a product and literally put your logo on it. Oh. So it's their formulations, it's their packaging materials, all of that.
Okay.
And that's how I had to start. So, and the truth is, I didn't know enough about the industry because everyone always asks, what would you go back and do different? And there's many things I say I wouldn't change anything because I feel like I've learned so much. But that's one area where now Cheekbone Beauty, in the last 2 years, we have nailed product market fit. And in the CPG industry or product-based business, that is the thing I think any entrepreneur needs to nail first, especially in food and beauty. One, food is first taste. Someone's going to love it or hate it. And if they hate it, they're never coming back to buy it and they're gone as a customer. So, and I was doing just all of this research and be listening to podcasts. And a lot of the businesses blowing up at the time were all these tech-based businesses. So they were talking about this minimum viable product conversation, just get started, throw what you will into the market. So I was hearing a lot of that. But the truth is in my industry, I really needed excellent products that were innovative, unique, and had a great story sort of behind the product, but I didn't really have that. I was using someone else's formulations. But what people did, and thank goodness, or I would have quit if we didn't get any traction, most certainly that early, people fell in love with the idea of this being kind of the first Indigenous brand. And we did a really good job of branding and marketing to embed culture into that. And I knew from the beginning, my vision was and I use this example so everybody kind of understands the direction I was trying to take it. And when I say this is just me for those first 3 years alone in my basement too. Brands like IKEA, I always knew, everything about IKEA is about that culture. Right. Hyundai car, it's about that culture. And so how can I do this with beauty and represent our culture in a beautiful way and share that so that there is this idea of representation for our community there. And that was the foundation. Then I start to learn pretty quickly and am faced with this oh my goodness, I honestly have no idea what I'm selling to people. Because customers started to ask, where does your mica come from? Why are you using black plastic? Do you know that environmentally speaking, that's the worst plastic you can use because it never gets recycled ever. It's going to the landfill basically directly. Beauty packaging all pretty much ends up in the landfill because it's too small. And then I started for a year, I'm in a rabbit hole of researching recycling and waste management systems around the world and really
Whoa.
learn that anything that is like small, like beauty,
Right.
that's going directly to the landfill because their systems aren't going to separate that stuff. They just toss it away. It's like, and the truth is, I think it's less than 8% of things that we put in these blue bins actually get recycled because nobody's recycling properly. And that's just the facts of like recycling is a business basically now, right? And so I'm like, oh my God, like what a waste. Like, so learning that like the sustainability side of things is really messed up. I have no idea about ingredients or formulation. And then I apply for this accelerator program that Sephora puts on, and I get selected to go meet some of their executives at their boardroom, which at the time was in their headquarters in Canada was in Mississauga near the airport. And I went to that meeting and I'm like showing the products and the brand. And you could tell they really loved like the idea and the branding because I feel like that's something that we were doing a good job on. And they're
Was
like,
it always called Cheekbone?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're like, we love you and we love the idea of this brand you're doing. But they were very clear. These products, anyone can do this. And then this is not going to make it like at all, ever. What you need to do is go back to the drawing board for product and then come show us something later. They didn't even say that. They were just like, your products, this will never exist because anyone can do this. And quite honestly, I've discovered now, so did the private labeler I was using out of Toronto. If you look at anyone that started a makeup brand are using like the same private labeler. So Sephora's not wrong. They legitimately, and then down in Arizona on the Navajo Nation, there's this brand that pops up. So like our Indigenous worlds we're 5% of the global population, Indigenous people. It is true. Like our cultures and communities, we all like kind of know each other. Okay. And so if you're in an Indigenous business and this person who started this brand was very vocal in public and so immediately learn and start to see, I'm like, oh my goodness, we're using the exact same private labeler. And I knew, I was like, oh my gosh. Like I just started to sit there and go, what a stupid business person. I'm like, anyone could do this. Like I'm a fool. What was I thinking? But I remembered my conversation with Sephora and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to figure out now how to make formulas. Like this is my next thing. And I knew I had no money. And I'm
How many years in were you at this point?
This is like a year and a half in, like really fast. So.
Oh, so you got before the board at Sephora pretty quickly.
Yeah,
we were like from dream to
we were literally, so we launched the online store e-commerce at the end of 2016. So November 2016, we start selling into 2017. We're like Flair magazine, if you remember them, they're digital. They did an article on us in 2017. Like we gained traction. We did $100,000 in business like our first year.
Wow.
From my basement with these products that I knew nothing about. So that's when I knew I was like, okay, there's something here.
Right.
I'm just freaking doing it all wrong.
Right.
And then start to work backwards. And then when I tell people, I said the advice I would give now is make sure you know that was the biggest mistake I made because I've even recognized when you can see the shift of where we transform the brand, which finally happens in 2021. Okay. Like we exit everything private white label. These are all now our formulations we've developed, we've created is happening in 2021. And it was just a complete confusion to the customers kind of thing. Like, and these are all, the learnings as I'm going and growing. And then when I was like, okay, this can't be how we go on, my next step was you got to find a chemist. And so all of a sudden I'm online one day and this popped up about learning how to make a lipstick. And I was like, oh, this is like, we all know that Google's listening to us, I guess. And so I am served with this ad and turns out there was this formulator chemist and she was I met with her in person, like drove to Guelph, I think it was. And because I was like and then I was learning people call themselves formulators, but they were like legitimately like me, like you don't have a degree, you're not a chemist, you don't really know, you've never worked for a massive organization. And here's even my issue when I met with this first chemist, I've learned since that even her as a trained chemist went to school, she never worked with a massive organization. So you can make a formula. Right. If you can't scale it,
Yeah.
It's
You can't do
I was
anything
gonna
with it.
swear
Oh, you can swear. Don't worry.
it's
Don't
gonna
worry.
be a really bad formula. It's not
Right.
gonna be the same. You have to know how to like take something from this small level into big production. And then moved on to new chemists. And then eventually, so I always say like in 2018, meet Raven Capital, who this is pivotal for us because no bank is in their right mind is gonna ever give me money for this business. I don't know people in the funding world. I feel like even back then, I didn't even know how to pitch the business properly. But thankfully, Raven comes into the world and they're the first Indigenous investment fund
Okay.
in the world. And their whole mission is to invest in businesses based on a social impact. And so Cheekbone's story from the beginning, we had been giving money away and supporting Indigenous youth through in-kind donations or cash donations to the First Nation Child and Family Caring Society. Like all of these different, we were always doing that.
Right.
Even while I had really no idea what I was doing, because that was the original purpose. It was like, can we make something from that dream, use a portion of the profits to support my community? That's kind of was the narrative. And I always, in that night of the dream, I actually wrote down to start a scholarship fund in honor of my grandmother. But I remember meeting an advisory board in the early day. They're like, you can't start that. Like, just focus on building this makeup brand because all that other stuff you want to do is like a whole nother business. And so we were just supporting organizations and giving product away and making donations. That was always kind of like who we are, like this business for good, if you will. And so Raven saw that and they were like, well, what's your real vision? And then I explained to them about these concepts of like taking our Indigenous teachings from the past and incorporating that into how we make and formulate products, like taking Western science, but thinking about ingredients from the level of biodegradability, compostability, like when it's going back, is this naturally derived ingredient going to marry well and be okay for the ecosystem? And now people are understanding it because you can go to Hawaii, you can't find a normal sunscreen.
Right.
You're using mineral because they don't allow chemical-based sunscreens anywhere on any of the Hawaiian Islands because they know that it's not great for the ecosystem when those chemicals go back into the water, right? And so now people are getting sort of the mission and vision of our entire brand. That's who we are. And this was my sort of new business pitch and to Raven, and they and I started meeting, and it went on for probably about 6 months to a year. And then I was just about to go tape for Dragon's Den, and they came back with a term sheet and they said, okay, we really think that you have what it takes to do this. And so we're going to give you $350,000 and it's called a convertible debt. And you can either turn that into equity later, they can, or we can make it a loan. And it was a reasonable rate. And I was like, okay, I think this is my shot. Like, this is the chance. And so that initial funding went to like, okay, I'm like, I built the lab at our headquarters in St. Catharines, hired our first chemist. And then I started working with sustainability scientists because science is like much probably like law. There's every kind of different aspect. And so one expert, when you're talking about toxicology, you're not going to talk to technically a chemist about that. You're going to talk to a toxicologist.
Right.
And in sustainability science, you're going to talk to somebody who's an expert in that kind of science. There's so many different kinds of, you need
different person
all of
for
them.
every process.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I was like, all right. So we got that. We built that and we started making our first product, which was the lipstick. And that launches in March of 2022. And so that was the beginning of us making this huge transformation into where we are today.
What an incredible journey.
But did not know anything. You're absolutely right. And I can't believe, I was just saying to
But that's the beauty of
Yeah.
it. That's the beauty of your story, is that like you weren't born into that life. You didn't go to school to be a chemist or an entrepreneur or a business person. You had literally a dream, an image, pen to paper, and fast forward, you've created this incredible business. Like that's the real message in what you do. I think, from my perspective, like I think it's much easier when people are born into that life or understand how to do it. But
like yesterday, the Wednesday, massive acquisition in beauty history. You've probably seen it. Hailey Bieber sold her brand for $1 billion in 3 years.
Yes.
And I did, of course, the most massive eye roll because it's just like, Yeah, because she probably started from how many millions
Of
and
course.
had every expert. And not to say she didn't build something beautiful. I don't want to take that away, but that's an unrealistic version of really what entrepreneurship
Of
is,
course.
right? Like that's not the real story
And
and
having that
journey.
name
Yeah,
obviously
you're
opens
Bieber. You're
some
Haley Bieber.
doors
Yeah,
for you for
yeah.
sure.
But I love this for her because I think now she's wealthier than Justin, right? So I think that's awesome. I think that's great. Yeah, and I think now I feel like my purpose in this world and doing this, when I look back, is most definitely to represent my community in a good way and be here for anybody who doesn't think it's possible. Because I literally remember having a moment in a Sephora, Sherway Gardens. I'm doing like the typical training with their team. And this is when we just launched in their stores and on shelf in store, because originally it was online. Then we did 5 doors, then 15, and now we're in 72. And I remember standing there and this team, and they're all young people. They're probably like, this woman is crazy. Like, what's happening? I was like, you guys, like that was in my head and now it's on the shelf. Like that is like
amazing.
building something like nothing into something. Like that's
Right.
crazy. Like that. And I just had one, and as entrepreneurs, we don't often stop and like do that. But I literally had this moment in front of that team and it gave me like goosebumps just because it's possible. It is. It's so hard. Never going to say, yeah, it just happened. Like, this is the hardest. I've had 2 kids. I'm married for 24 years. This literally Cheekbone is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I don't envision it getting easier. Sometimes it feels like it gets harder.
Yes.
But what is beautiful about life, and I tell this to my kids all the time, life is going to get harder, but the amazing part is we get stronger and we just learn how to cope with things differently and handle things differently.
And I think we take on more the more that we succeed in the things we do. Right? Like I'm always thinking about what's next.
Yeah.
And people around me are like,
It's
Jesus Christ, can you not
like,
just
slow
be like
down.
happy with your life?
Yeah.
Like just be content with what you do. Like when I told
Yeah.
people I was starting a podcast, they're like, you work like 100 hours a week. I don't understand how you're fitting that in.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know, but I just like, like I told you at the beginning, like when I was in law school, I couldn't point to anyone and think if she can do it, I can do it. I didn't have that.
Yeah.
And, as this little like high school dropout street kid, I didn't think that I could be where I'm at today and have this like thriving law practice. And I didn't have anyone that I could look to say, well, if she could do it, I could do it. And so my podcast is about, being that example, but also showing examples like yourself. Like
But this is your service to
right. But people
community.
can look and say, look, she could do it. I can do it too. Right.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have that background, because you weren't born with a silver spoon, because nobody taught you. And you literally just had to, through every step and through every fumble, figure out how to continue. And you continue. You didn't quit. Why didn't you quit? What is it that made you keep going, through all of these, like, they're not failures, but hiccups and pivots and doors closing on you, like Sephora first telling you, like, sure, your branding's great, but your product is essentially shit. So come back and figure
They're
this
like,
out.
This will never sit on our shelves.
Right.
Got
and
it.
so,
Yeah.
there are so many people that at that point would have been like, okay, see ya. That's my call to exit this dream and go back to, selling seafood. And you were like, okay, well, now I got to figure out how to make a good product.
Yeah.
Why? How? Where does that come from in you?
Well, I definitely think I'm super gritty, but I also, this is where, for me, it became super personal. I lost my brother to suicide just before launching this. And so that has been the reason I haven't given up. Despite many times, he's not even here, but yelling at him, like, why did you have to say those words? Because it is the reason I go on. And he said, when he started to hear about this brand and what I was going to do, I said, I would ask him so much advice too, because he grew up on res in community. And I'd never wanted to appropriate my own culture, if you will, while building the brand. And he said in the very early, he's like, Jen, wow, this is, he'd never heard of an Indigenous business wanting to be this big. And he'd never heard of one that was existing to give back to our communities, right? Like, and he really believed, he's like, this is going to, be so important to our youth. He was a youth worker on our community, and he said, this is going to give them hope and provide them hope. And so legitimately, that is why I haven't given up. And I still feel so it's. I had a dinner this week with a whole bunch of other founders, and it's some of them are in the stages where they're ready to give up, and that's normal. That happens in business. But I'm still so passionate about building this brand, and I'm still so passionate, and I feel like we have such a long way to go. Like, not every Canadian knows about it, and I'm not going to rest until they do. And then I've also envisioned this being a global brand, and absolutely believe it's possible. Last week, I did a live with these two women that own a beauty store in Prague. And, I don't know any of their language. And the two of them love the brand. They've had their store for like 8 years. And they're just so passionate about our brand. And it's like front and center right beside their Kylie Cosmetics. And they're like, we can't believe this is like naturally derived makeup. And like, our customers are loving it. Like, these pencils are the best thing. Like, they can change people how they do makeup. Like, how did you come up? And I was like, they're asking me all this. And I'm just fascinated that every few minutes they're then translating it into their language for their community and their audience. And I was like, wow, that idea I have to make this global is possible, right? Because there's, it's already people all over the world are discovering it. We have a big audience in Canada. We have a big audience in the US, but I guess sort of going over the seas portion had never been there. And just after last week, I was like, no, we are. Like, we're still so small. We still have such a long way to go. We're in this massive industry, complete David and Goliath scenario. Like, we are nothing compared to the giants that run everything in beauty. And there's like 5 of them. And now we see Elf creeping up to be the next like Estee Lauder in this like recent acquisition. So there's going to be 6 major conglomerates that we're fighting against. But I believe it's possible. And I believe in this whole concept that we have pioneered as a brand, and it's called Indigenous beauty. We know all over the world, we know what it means now when people say Korean beauty, because their skincare has blown up and everyone understands Korean beauty is all about the steps and all the things you're doing. We know about Ayurvedic beauty from the Indian community, and we know French beauty is like perfume and red lipstick. We have worked so hard to try to define this space, Indigenous beauty, and we want so many more Indigenous brands to come, whether it's skincare, hair care, and really be here with us, where that word Indigenous beauty, when people hear it, it's going to be synonymous with sustainability. And people are going to get that that's what this means. And we're really excited because we're in the process of writing a book, and that will come out in this year, and that will help the world understand what that means. And so I feel like there's so much more for us to do.
That's amazing. I love it. I can't wait to see what's next. Before we close off, there's something that I really want to touch on. You and I met on a panel for Scotia a few months ago, and you spoke about your scholarship program. I also have a scholarship program.
Oh, no way.
I do. So I have a scholarship program called Against All Odds, and it's for law students who have made it into either Osgoode Hall Law School or Windsor, who have been exposed to or endured extreme personal adversity. And so they made it to law school against all odds. And for me, it was really important to give back and also to try to help, sort of the next generation of youth who have struggled through whatever their own personal hell is and still wanted to become lawyers. And so I try to ease some of the financial burden. But you spoke about your scholarship program, which is both a tribute to your brother as well as to your community. So can you just tell us about that? Because I think it's such an important part of what you do. And I know how meaningful it is to you.
Thanks for letting me. So that original dream was like, okay, what can we do to give back? And so finally in 2021, with the support of Inspire, which has always existed to help Indigenous youth in their education, we are able to give out scholarships now. And so we're a B Corp certified company. So what that means is we have an obligation to people and the planet before profits. And so 2% of our annual revenues go back to causes that matter. And so for us, it's the Cheekbone Beauty Scholarship Fund. And in 2021, we gave out our first one. And now we've given out 30. as
Wow.
of this past year. And our goal is to obviously just keep that growing. I feel like there's so many youth that have big dreams. And I really firmly believe that sometimes education, is the foundation of the next steps or where you're going to go. And I just think education is so powerful. And that's why we always had focused on that in how we could support or give back to community.
Right.
And that it developed from that original dream. And I'm just so proud that we get to do that. And I feel like it truly was an incredible way to honor my grandmother who survived residential school and honor my brother as well.
That's amazing. I love that. And is it different universities across Canada?
Any education.
Any education program?
So literally, we definitely didn't just choose like university.
Okay.
We look at it like if they wanted to go to like going to school to become a makeup artist is really expensive. So people are literally allowed to use it for anything that they choose.
That's amazing.
Trade, whatever.
I love that. I love your story. I honestly cannot wait to see what Cheekbone Beauty becomes.
Oh, thank you.
Funny enough, I'm actually going to be in Prague this
No
July.
way.
Yes. My partner's Czech. And
it's so
if you ever need
cool.
translation,
Yeah.
let us know. But
amazing.
I'd love to see where your brand ends up, and we'll go and take some pictures and check it out and help support and promote, because it really is. Your story is amazing and your product's incredible. So. And thank you so much for spending the time on Who Judges the Judge and being so open to share with us.
Thank you for having me. This is great.